Showtime.
Welcome, fool. You have come of your own free will to the appointed place. The game is over. Welcome to another episode of Inside Movies Galore. I'm Dustin, hosting tonight. Here with our panel members. Everybody want to say their names?
I'm Katie.
Kabuki Jake. We've got Kabuki Jake, Brandon, and Dane, who is around here somewhere.
Hello.
So, yeah, Dave isn't feeling the greatest right now, so I'm hosting tonight with a movie that I absolutely love. So tonight's episode, we're discussing one of the greatest suspense or mystery or, I don't know, British movies ever made. Rob Hardy's 1973 The Wicker Man, not the horrible Nicolas Cage one, which we will address. I am not nice to it. So, well, first off, we're just going to start with our spoiler warning. We'll be discussing the plot, the best moments, themes, and twists of the film. So if you somehow haven't seen it, stop now and go fix that. There's a few copies around on YouTube. Like, it's kind of chopped up, and you can see it on there. Or you could track down the US Blu-ray release of the final cut, which is the best version / print of the movie we'll probably ever get. Or if you're lucky and have a machine that'll actually play the stupid thing, you can get the spectacular Studio Canal Steelbook Blu-ray, which comes with way more stuff than that American release. But the point is, if you haven't seen it, just go see it. Now that you've been spoiler warned, let's get to that appointment. Ooh, I needed to breathe. Sorry about the little delay there, guys. So, all right. Well, we're going to do.
It's important.
So, well, just a quick synopsis of what this movie is about. The Wicker Man is about a Catholic policeman investigating a young girl's disappearance from an isolated pagan community in the British Isles. But things aren't exactly what it seems. So it's definitely more of a mystery kind of movie. It's kind of a difficult movie to describe. Like, even the filmmakers themselves weren't quite sure how to put it. So, like, Christopher Lee openly scoffed at it being called a horror film, which I thought was kind of funny. But, that aside, so we're going to start with first impressions. So the first time I saw this movie was when I started getting into horror. I had heard about its spectacular twist ending, and it kind of had it spoiled by, it was this stupid program on Bravo, 100 Scariest Movie Moments. And I basically used that as a list of movies to look for. And The Wicker Man sounded really intriguing, especially after they spoiled the moment that, I think it'll be pretty clear which moment, when we get to it, was on that list. But I saw it and ended up really loving it because it had a lot of depth to it, like a lot of questions about sort of the nature of religion and belief. And it just has so much to offer. And so now we're going to go into another first impression. How about you, Brandon?
All right, taking it off of mute. Well, the first thing I can say is the bees. No, wrong film.
Wrong one, you son of a bitch.
But in truth, when I first saw this film, it was I associated a lot with my grandparents because it was in the house and in the very room I'm now occupying, which was a media room back in those days, and it just happened to be sitting there. And they don't like horror films, so I was surprised to see something like that there, and it just intrigued me. Over and over again, I kept seeing the cover of this movie as I would visit. And this is around the release. That's like the around the time of the very first DVD release of it. And I eventually just got to the point where I put it in the DVD player, and it's like, you know what? I'm going to watch this. I don't know why I was in college at the time, so I was living here. So I said, I'm bored. Let me watch this. I mean, I'd been up for 72 hours working on a college project, and
Sounds familiar.
It might be something fun to watch to wind myself down so I could get a couple hours of sleep and go back to work again. And it was a surreal experience that made me glad that I decided to watch it again.
Traumatized, can't sleep. Who wants to go next?
Sure, why not? So, yeah, this was my first time seeing it, and it was good. It's I happened to have a copy. I can't remember if I got it from you, Brandon, or if I got it from the library. I really don't remember.
I've
But
got you.
I got it cheap either way. So just sitting around, and I was like, "This is a good time to watch it." And I was not blown away. I'll admit. I'm going to be. I had heard so much about it. I do agree that it's not exactly a typical horror film by any stretch. It almost is more of a psychological drama, I think. But it was pretty good overall. And Christopher Lee is always fun to watch. So, yeah.
He kind of runs away with the movie, yeah.
He's a lot younger in this movie. It's like watching Sam Elliott and Frogs. You know, it's like, what?
His hair has color. What is this?
Yes.
All right, moving down the line. How about you, Katie?
This actually was a first-time watch for me as well.
Disappointed in you.
Surprisingly, this was not one that I ever ran into, and probably because Ryan doesn't own it. But as far as my impressions of the movie, it was definitely like a slow burn, no pun intended, film in terms
Works
of
for me.
the horror aspect. And I think I agree with, the idea of it being more of a drama or a mystery almost in a way. But it was an interesting concept overall. I thought it was a little strange, the sort of musical aspect of it.
Mhm.
That it kind of watched like a 70s musical, like was waiting for the Partridge Family to jump out or something.
Yeah.
But it definitely held my attention. I actually, though I did fall asleep during my first attempt and had the most fucked up dream. Like the movie must have been on in the background of my dream because it was very strange.
That's what you get.
No kidding. But I too enjoy the young Christopher Lee in this film. That was a very interesting sight to see. I haven't seen him in a lot of movies where he's young, so yeah. Overall, I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. I was kind of fell right in the middle on this one.
We'll discuss this further later. All right, Dave, how about
Sure.
you take a crack at it?
I saw this when I was fairly young, and that's always a good thing to me. The younger you see them, the more terrifying they are in their existence today, at least in my point of view. So, in a sense, it was kind of haunting to me the first time that I had seen it somewhat, because I feel like I saw only bits and pieces of it, and then I watched it a couple of years ago, and then just recently, I think this is the first time I've actually watched it in its full extended version. So, I think for its time that it came out, there was definitely a lot more sexual content than I thought there would be in a film like this, you know?
Oh yeah, that's something that sort of ties into the plot, which we'll get to pretty quickly. Speaking
Feels
to
like
that,
it was more nudity than sexual content, though. I mean, was there actually any sex?
not on camera, but they were hitting us over the head with it pretty hard.
Yeah, I mean, it was inferred, absolutely. Definitely inferred.
Sexual content.
The walls were like shaking.
Hey, he was enticing him from the other room. Get that.
Well, again, we'll get to that. I do want to add that I think I kind of benefited from seeing the movie from the first time as an adult, because when I was younger, the pace of this would have probably just bored me. So I think there's something to be said for seeing something like this. Has kind of a deeper intellectual component too. Like, it works better if you're able to like think about what's happening and understand more of what you're seeing. And I think that helps I think that might be one of the reasons I like it so much, because I saw it as an adult and could appreciate that. But and finally, it's your turn, Dane. Is he
Hang
there?
on. Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute my mic. Yeah. So this was a first time watch for me. I had wanted to see it for a long time and never did, but yeah, I liked it. I concur with a lot of the previous points about it was slow burn, but I did appreciate the atmosphere. I really loved it. What's funny is that, and I concur also with how it felt a lot like a musical in terms of just uh, how much music played into the story, but also in many ways, at least to me, it kind of felt like a weird travelogue, of what native Scottish or Celtic, belief systems would have been, and also like, it just honestly it made me want to visit Scotland.
There's a lot of beautiful country on camera in there.
Oh yeah, well they definitely they show it off very well, and I've always wanted to visit Scotland, and this definitely made me want to do it. As bizarre as that sounds, but it's just like not only beautiful landscapes and beautiful traditional music, which I love hearing music from that is traditional and native to whatever region of the world we're talking about in the story. Um, and so I definitely appreciated that side of it. Once we get into theme, then I'll be able to talk about the religious aspects, which I thought were pretty interesting, but I don't want to jump ahead too much.
Right, and that's definitely a big part of it, and especially the opening scenes too. Like, I can see how you get the travelogue feel from it, because the movie. So a bit of an explanation is in order. So some of us have alluded to like the multiple cuts of this as a generator powers on in the background. So when this was originally finished and screened for producers, the studio was going through a bit of changeover, and the new owners hated this movie. So Christopher Lee was at a screening with his wife, and he was like, "Wow, that was great." And he asked the people in charge, what did they think? And I think it's the worst. British Lion.
Okay.
And they were like, "It's the worst thing I've ever seen." And it's like, oh. And so a lot of it was cut and just mangled, really. So there were, according to Christopher Lee, there were 13 to 20 minutes that were just missing from like the cut that he saw. And the footage more or less disappeared for a while. So the film was available only in kind of a truncated version for a very long time. And then it turns out Roger Corman actually partially saved this movie, because when they were shipping it out for distribution, they more or less accidentally sent him a longer cut of it, and they kind of forgot he had it. So there is the original theatrical version, which I think is 70-some minutes long, and then there's an extended cut, which is I think 84 or something along those lines. Bless you. And then
I watched it on Shudder. I wonder which version I saw.
I think the one I saw on the back of the case, it said like 80.
It was 94 minutes that I sent everyone.
The one that I have is the final cut, which is like the most complete version we'll probably get. That's the one that's in the UK Steelbook. Okay. So that version is 94 minutes. So you have the final cut if Dave sent you the film.
Well, I watched it on Shudder.
Okay. Well, you'll probably be able to know what version you have right away, because the reason I bring that up is the final cut has a different opening than the theatrical cut. So.
Yeah. I know mine is definitely because it's the same version I watched all those years ago. I inherited it when I inherited. I didn't inherit the house, but when I inherited a lot of that DVD collection because nobody wanted them.
So the final cut opens with Sergeant Howie, the police officer who we alluded to earlier. singing a hymn and reading from a pulpit at his church. And ironically, he's reading a passage about sacrifice, which is a strong running theme of the movie. And then after that, we get a little bit of expository dialogue. It's like, oh, we got a letter about a missing girl on the Summer Isle. And so then we get an aerial montage of him flying to Summer Isle in his seaplane. So how did your movies open? Like, which versions did you see?
My version did open up with that. So when I watched it, it was the pulpit scene and the extra added scenes. So that's the version that I gave everyone. I wanted them to see it in the most complete. So
I want to say the one I saw, the pulpit scene came a few minutes into the movie, if I'm remembering that correctly. I feel like I'd already been getting into the story, and then it was flashing to this pulpit, and I was a little confused.
Some of the different releases had kind of a jumbled cut.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of I don't know. I've owned, I think, 4 or 5 different versions of this movie just from different DVD releases. So it's possible you could have one that I haven't seen before with a few of the scenes like out of order.
I know mine is less than 10 minutes more, because if the 94-minute is the complete, mine was only a 6-minute difference, because mine was 88 minutes in length. And I do remember the pulpit scene itself as well, but being later in, as far as it's sort of like a flashback treatment.
Yeah.
Mine started also with the plane.
okay.
Yeah, and I know we're not doing character quite yet, but it's sort of important to understand who Sergeant Howie is for a lot of like what we're about to see to kind of start making sense. So Sergeant Howie is deeply religious. Like, he's Catholic. He has a very strong, my faith is right, I can't be wrong approach to everything, and is very serious about like his worldview, and especially with like his job as a police officer. And so when he arrives on this pagan island and just sees kind of what's going on there, like, he views their religion as perverse and offensive, but on the flip side, they see Christianity in the same way. And in the end, it turns out the islanders' faith in paganism may be stronger than Howie's faith in Catholicism. So a lot of the scenes kind of hinge around Howie's his indignation at what he's seeing the islanders practice, and the plot moves forward fairly quickly and tightly. So it's almost like we move from scene to scene, except each one like has a distinct purpose and something happens in it. So, and it unfolds as a mystery movie, like as Howie discovers clues, and as Howie sort of gets closer to the truth of what happened, or, well, what he thinks happened. Like, the audience, you can kind of piece it together sort of yourself, and you can sort of see, oh my god, I forgot the actor's name. Who played Sergeant Howie again? Was it Rob?
Like Edward Woodward or something?
Ed
like that?
Woodward, yes. So, like, the way Ed Woodward plays it, like, you can see him starting to become kind of, like, concerned, and we sort of start to feel it at the same time, too. So, like, we get, like, I got, like, a sense of dread as he was, like, about what might have happened to this girl, her name's Rowan, as we move along. But, anyway, so, after either the hymnal scene or the montage of him flying to Summer Island in his plane,
Are we still talking about plot?
Well, we're kind of trying. I'm trying to go through the plot point by point, but I keep somewhat misplacing my place. So Summer Isle is an agrarian community. They're famous for a special breed of apples that grow in these like cold islands, and he's brought there by. First off, he's brought there kind of suspiciously. He gets an anonymous note specifically addressed to him, and right away, like, something is off about this place. Like, did you guys kind of get that too?
When he arrived, and the people were the people were trying to wave him off because he'd have to kind of pay.
You can't land here. It's private property. It's like, I'm the police.
When there's a homicide that's involved with, or with a little girl with the mainland dude, I exist over y'all, you know.
I've come here with authority. Like, what are you doing?
I am the authority.
And so anyway, he gets a room and starts investigating. I'm sorry, guys. I've been sick too. I blame winter. So right away we get an introduction to a bunch of the Islanders when he stays at the inn that night. So, and we also get like our first kind of the case for it being a musical is kind of made in a lot of the songs that we see in the film are sort of sung by the villagers. And so they're singing a really like raunchy tavern song about the landlord's daughter Willow,
right?
Who,
which they are being psychosuggestive that she'll sleep with any man that comes around, or any man that might be lucky enough to be in her good graces.
Between her left toe and her right toe.
Exactly. Oh, right.
It's like
the music, though. The music is a character in of itself.
Yeah.
We've talked about music in films like Suspiria. Gosh, what was the other film that that Goblin did that I tried to block out the rest of it?
Did we do Deep Red? Was that Deep Red?
No, not Deep Red. It was the one where the guy was chopping people up and
Omega.
Yeah. Yeah, but you know, and but to me, this also is just as memorable, if not even more so, for the haunting nature of it. Some of these are older ballads, and some of these are remixes of things from old. But the music itself is an amazing piece of this, and could be listened to on its own without much problem.
I do that all the time. So I think the album is the only like folk music in my library. And I mean,
so there is an album out on this, huh?
Well, it's kind of hard to it's kind of complex. So one of the special editions that was released, it's like a wood box put out by Anchor Bay that has like the Wicker Man, like the movie art for this is a picture of the giant Wicker Man from the finale, with the title of the movie, and it's a wood box. The case is a wood box that has those wood burned into it. It's actually really nice, and that comes with a CD of the soundtrack. So I think that's where I got mine from. I also have maybe it's not on this one. I might be wrong. Truth is, I own like 4 different versions of this movie, so I have an import that has the soundtrack on a CD. So apparently I'm getting my editions mixed up. So, like, what's good about the music in that scene is, I mean, the music is used to introduce characters a lot, or like set a mood, which is what music is used for anyway. However, like this time it seems a lot more effective. Like just listening to the song, it's like, oh, you know, are they like making fun of her, or like, and then the way she kind of plays into the song, like at some of the lyrics, you know, she's like, you know, bumping into the guys, like, oh, and it's like, oh,
well, I thought the most interesting song, besides the bar song, was the song where all the children are singing it. With the preacher, minister, or
the maypole,
while they're going around this tree.
That's a maypole.
Yeah, the maple. And he was singing about the rare branch on this tree or whatnot. I've heard that song before. It's just, I think Rafi sang it.
That was kind of a funny story from. I showed this to a friend of mine, and he was really impressed with it, and he showed it to his mom later, and he said that, you know, during the maypole scene, his mom was like, "Oh, we used to sing that song all the time," and he just kind of like looked at her and like scooted away a little bit. Anyway, so he starts his investigation kind of right away. Like he notices there's a missing picture on the wall. Like he's been asking around about the girl, and people are kind of like, "Oh, we never heard of her," and it's just suspicious, like right off the bat. Like, did you guys kind of catch that too, or?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, they were going out of their way to be suspicious, and that made me suspicious at the beginning. Suspicious of being suspicious.
Well, it is kind of interesting how the what they let on builds slightly throughout. You know, at the beginning they're just completely, nah, never heard of her. Yeah. But of course, you know, the part that really throws him was when he goes to her supposed mother and she's never heard of her. Yeah. Quote, never heard of her.
And then when he speaks to the child that is supposedly her real daughter.
Oh, she's in here. Yeah.
But
so after he finds that, he walks around and we get like our first real big like montage of just bizarre pagan practices, and like there are couples like all over the place just together, like having sex on the lawn
at night. Aren't they just like copulating like a little bit too much?
Well, yeah, it's kind of our first moment where like we see him kind of like freak out, like, wait, what's happening here? You know, he's looking around, there are like naked people mourning in the graveyard, there's just like all this bizarre stuff happening. And it's kind of funny to watch him sort of be like, wait, what? Because he's been established as a very stuffy, like not open character. Like one of the interesting things about this place is that it seems to have completely different like mores of sexuality. Like sex is openly and freely celebrated, which is that ties into like a later line where he's like, you know, what is going on here? You know, this is perverse. And one of the cut scenes actually was Christopher Lee's character delivering kind of a rebuttal to that. You know, like, I find your suppression, you know, and denial of your instincts perverse. You know, Christopher Lee in interviews was like really proud of that, but it was one of the things that was cut and just never discovered again. So we really missed out on that. It seems like there wasn't even the dialogue somewhere that he could just like reread it. Like, can you imagine like an angry anti-religious rant in Christopher Lee's voice?
Yes.
I can. And once again, I have to say, because of the music in here, you get to hear Christopher Lee's very low voice, and it just kind of reminded me of the moment where he's Lord Sauron in Lord of the Rings, dancing over across the way to the two towers, and you hear that low voice, and then he's
just
so
like
young looking, and you hear that voice.
Where he's just like Saruman, and he's like, blah, 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 and like the mountain is like falling down.
Yeah.
I'm just like laughing thinking about that now.
Yeah. I have a different thought about the take on religion in this, but I don't really know if this is the right place because it's more of an overview. So I'll hold that till the end. But
well, we can go in. Well, yeah, I guess we'll try to keep moving through the plot.
Yeah, I'll just try and remember it for later on when it gets to that point.
It's kind of funny because I wrote myself a scene-by-scene synopsis, but it's not exactly organic to just read that, you know? So we're learning stuff today about structure and planning. We're learning we're bad at it. And the song in this scene is called Gently Johnny. Like, I didn't look it up, but I remember doing it once before, and it's like some kind of old folk song. If you pay attention to the lyrics, it's really, really dirty. Wow.
What I took from the Gently Johnny song is there is an old wives' tale. But there is a gentleman, Johnny, who dresses up and steals from the rich and gives to the poor kind of a character. But he would do so against stagecoaches or carriages or something like that. And he was called Gentleman Johnny. So I don't know whether there's a reference to that. Or
unless he's leaving babies in people, probably not. That's it's not correct.
But that's what I was thinking in my mind.
Giving babies to the Poland.
Well, like if you were you guys able to like make out a lot of the lyrics to that in that scene?
Not really.
Most of the music had more feel.
Well, like as the song kind of builds, it's like I'm trying to remember where it starts. It's like she sits. It's the first like it ramps up like after each chorus, and like the first one is like she sits next to me, and then the Gently Johnny chorus plays down. It's like I put my hand on, and then the next one I put my hand on her thigh. She asks, "Do you want to try?" And then it goes to like the next. Then it goes through the chorus again, and then like the last lines before the chorus just starts again and like repeats until it's over. It's like I put her hand on my belly and she asks, "Do you want to fill me?" And it's like, damn, this is really suggestive. So it's like really appropriate for that scene, because it's more of like a procreational thing. Like it's not just oh, everybody's out in the street fucking each other. No, it's almost dignified. It's sort of
It's very ritualistic.
exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of rituals, like we get Christopher Lee's character introduced here. Like he's bringing this teenager to Willow for somebody else say it.
For love-making session?
It's like,
impregnate her?
Well, as Christopher Lee puts it, he's a sacrifice to Aphrodite. So, and again, it's just more support for, like, this place has, like, very open sexuality, and, like, it's almost more of, like, a recognized, like, rite of passage. It's like, oh, lose your virginity, and, that even plays into the scene. Like, she says his name, and it's like, oh, well, come up. And, like, the people in the bar, like, watch him go up the stairs. And, like, when they hear, like, the beds start moving, they're all like, yeah! And, like, the song continues, and it's like, oh, all right. And, of course, our extremely repressed captain is like, what the fuck is going on here? So, and then the next day we go into the Maypole scene. Like, the Maypole dance is a traditional, like, spring kind of thing. Again, it's another old song with, like, a lot of hidden meaning, and they actually explain it in the next scene. So it's all the boys are, like, dancing around the Maypole, and, they're singing the Maypole song, which is about, I guess, like, the genesis of life during spring. I don't want to just sing the whole song.
Well,
do it.
But,
just sing it.
One thing that I liked about some of the songs in here, especially this Maple scene, is the fact that if you know anything about music, some music is called, when it's sung together in a group, and when voices start singing along, and then they sing in a round, they eventually call these musical pieces madrigals. And I remember hearing several magical singing among the child's voices that were just kind of cool. They meshed really good.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. The way that they had a lot of these songs that made them have that almost eeriness, that etherealness, is because a lot of them were sung together. Be it the extra raunchiness in the bar, or the creepy, almost creepiness, and this is etherealness of the children singing in the woods, or the women singing later on. It is just it is something that having them sing as a group, singing together, that to me is what leads this to being what it was musically.
Yeah, and as they explain in like the second part of the scene, the maypole is a phallic symbol, and that's when I realized it's like, oh wait, everybody's singing around the maypole were boys. Oh, that's kind of neat. How there's like extra kind of thought put into that meaning, and like all the girls are sitting in class, kind of like cheering along with the song. And it's like, oh, that's kind of like disturbing. But then again, that was how the song itself kind of came off. Like, I agree with the assessment that a lot of the way the music was used, like, it's fairly innocuous music, but it's just creepy in a lot of the places they use it. It's like, if I had been Sergeant Howie, I would have felt in danger kind of right there, because it's like,
Okay,
and then he goes,
keep in mind that in a lot of cultures, a lot of indigenous cultures, the fertility rites or rites of passage, or uh, how the phallus was perceived, or things like that. Those have taken on a variety of shapes over the centuries. Like they weren't shy about it in Roman times. So it's like that whole thing. I thought was interesting from a historical perspective, because native Celtic people are definitely not the only ones who have made the kind of fertility rites that commonplace in their culture.
exactly, and that's kind of why it's so jarring, I think, because we've been so far removed from that for so long. Like, in our cultures, at least in like modern, for lack of a better term, like European cultures, and especially Christian cultures, like that kind of thing.
And that's that's the thing with
It's all deliberate.
Well, it's also not to get too far afield here, but it's like I kind of assumed that our main character, Sergeant Howie, that he, well, not only is he very religious, but I assume that he comes from a more rural area of Scotland, which at that time, now in America we had like the hippie movement in the late 60s, and then that kind of became undone by the early 70s. And I think in England, I don't think it was quite, or in the UK, I don't think it didn't look quite the same. They obviously didn't have Charles Manson or anything, but I do think that they had their own kind of flower power culture at that time, and then it kind of degenerated in the 70s. So but by that time you had a lot of the resurgence of pagan ideas, specifically free love and being one with nature and all that kind of stuff that was around at that time. So you could easily read Sergeant Howie's reaction to it as kind of rural Scotland, or rural culture's reaction to what would become of these kind of resurgence of these ancient ideas made new again.
I don't think I could have said that any better. That's great.
Well, that's I mean, again, I don't want to get too far afield, but it's like I think that theme is really prominent in the story, and once we get to the religious aspects,
in many ways it's the point of the story.
Well, there's that, but also in many ways I think it's that juxtaposed with kind of the traditional Christian martyr's journey, because he proceeds, Sergeant Howie proceeds in a similar fashion to a traditional Christian martyr, one who would later go on to be a saint, let's say, after many years. but in kind of the inward spiritual journey of someone who, tries to stick close to their beliefs and is challenged by a changing world, a older world made new again, all those kinds of things. And um, again, I don't want to get too far afield, but I think
Oh yeah,
that
but
it ties into that.
well, and that sort of leads directly into, so when he's in the school, he does learn a few more things. Like he asks if anybody was Rowan's classmate, and a few things like that. And he learns that Christianity didn't necessarily take here, and there is a church. It's just like in ruins, and there's no priest on the island. So he
Oh
goes
yeah.
he
Well,
goes right
in
to
a
check that
way,
out.
similar. Well, building on that, it's kind of the opposite of historically speaking. You had native cultures in what we now call England and Scotland and Germany and places like that. What we now call that would have been called like Gaul in the time of the Romans, for example. And then once the spread of Christianity happened under Emperor Constantine, then those cultures were either fully supplanted or integrated with Christianity at that time.
Yeah,
And
Druidism got either assimilated or stamped out.
yeah, so but then this is like kind of the opposite occurring because it's this little pocket that's kind of free from the rest of civilization, even though they do have contact, albeit limited and deliberately self-isolating. It's not like they're not aware that the outside world exists. They're
Like
not well, and they're not Amish, for example.
kind of like their
Um,
very own village or their very own brigadoon.
yeah, but it is the undoing of those centuries of having had native practices integrated or supplanted by Christianity. And I think that again plays on the fears of a more traditionalist person having to deal with a changing world. I think you could easily make this same kind of story, not the remake that we'll inevitably talk about, but like,
Oh god, the remake is so
well,
bad.
but I mean, like this kind of story, I think you could easily make today with a traditional person, whether religiously or culturally, facing, say, changing gender roles or changing racial demographics in the country, and find some way to talk about that in a mystery horror way. But it's like that idea doesn't really go away of the traditionalist establishment person having to deal with that which is old made new again
Yeah,
and change.
it is kind of funny that like in this what you're describing, I think really fits with the story. I just think it's kind of funny that the new change that he's encountering is like the original culture that like it's totally flipped.
Well, it
Uh,
is, and
I
yet
have no
it
eloquent way
isn't.
to put it.
Well, it is, and yet it isn't, because it is it's the old ways, but it's informed by what would then be the establishment, because it was in the 1800s, and Catholicism and Protestantism, would have been fighting it out pretty well in the UK and what we now call the UK and Scotland specifically. It was Presbyterianism was
Excuse
founded
me.
in Scotland,
And
and so you have
What was that,
that.
Dave?
I was going to say I got more of a Protestant. Uh,
Yeah, I didn't sense Catholic either. He said, minister, I think, and so I would have said either Anglican or Presbyterian.
Huh. I'd
But
heard him. I'd heard them refer to him as Catholic in some of like the interviews I'd seen, but I could have misheard that.
well, it's possible. I mean, the thing you find with especially like Anglicanism or Church of England. I mean, it's practically the same as Catholicism, except their hierarchy is that the head of the church is, well, whoever the monarch is at the time, but also like religiously, it's the Archbishop of Canterbury as opposed to the Pope.
But
But
anyway,
the point is that you had these people who chose to resurrect the old ways in the face of what would have been the establishment religion for centuries, when at one time Christianity was the upstart. So it is a reversal, but it's informed by the present rather than being ignorant of it.
Right, and so actually in that church scene, did anybody else catch, like, he's just like looking around like and at one point, like, just in a fit of anger, he like breaks that box and like makes a cross because there's no cross on the site.
Actually,
Mm-hmm.
that to me was a poignant piece, and I caught it more on the second go round. As I said, the first time I saw it, I had gone 72 hours without sleep, and had lots of deadlines and classes, and I also was working 40 hours a week at the time. So I was kind of in a different state of mind, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But to me, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing this almost in the same vein as one would look at The Exorcist. And this was a theory I had in my mind looking at this as a horror movie, that this could be considered a horror movie for Christians, much like The Exorcist is a horror movie for Christians.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at with the saint's journey or you could even equate it to just not even necessarily the saint, but like or the martyr's journey, as I originally said, but the Christian's journey through the unfamiliar or the pagan or the decadent, the threatening, the temptations, and that's my favorite scene is Willow's song that she sings when she's completely naked in the next room, and it's just that to me that summed up the movie. It was the person trying to do what is right amidst his own admittedly traditional, repressed, stuffy nature, but still trying to do. But he's still trying to do what is ultimately right. It is the expected thing to do. It's the traditional thing to do, but he's still a man of the law and of of more familiar Judeo-Christian morality. But then, there's always the temptation for, the
save it for the scene. Save it for the scene.
Okay.
To stray from his Christianity path.
Oh yeah. Well, it's that, but it's also the thrill of the unknown and unfamiliar, and obviously the fact that they are their culture is much more in tune with the world of the physical, and they don't shy away from that. And with earth specifically, earth, flesh, nature, all that stuff.
That sort of ties into another part of that scene too. Like he's looking around at the graves, and he asks, I think it's like the groundskeeper, he asks somebody, and they're like, "Oh, Rowan's buried here." And there's something on like the tree, like, then they explain that when someone dies, they plant a tree on the grave, and there's like a little, like, what looks like a strip of flesh, and I guess it's her umbilical cord, like that was an old tradition or something.
Yeah, that thing looked like bacon to me. I don't know if anyone else thought of that. It really did.
Hear the sizzle in the background.
What?
I'm kidding.
What'd you say, Katie?
I said I was kidding, but I said, did you hear the sizzle in the background?
Gross.
But the
was kind of.
I do agree that scene in the graveyard's very telling, because it's him trying to hold on to some semblance of sanity or Christian morality, conventionality, however you want to say it. Him trying to hold on to that in the midst of something that he does not understand, and that only proves to be more and more crazy and dangerous as the story progresses.
Right.
And I'm not mistaken, I think the groundskeeper is the first person to answer in the affirmative about Rowan. Like,
yes,
I think he was the first one to say, "Oh yeah, she's here."
Not on the same brainwashed townsfolkman. Like he's not been pre-programmed to say the things that he's supposed to say. Like he's kind of like the
Yeah, it's his first like decent lead, aside from the absence of that photo, which turns out to be pretty important, but he hasn't figured that out yet. So he asks for permission to exhume the body, and they turn him down because you need to get the permission of the local justice of the peace. And again, he has an "I'm the police" moment. It's kind of funny how he keeps trying to throw his authority around, but nobody really cares.
Well, here's something
Well,
I
I
thought
didn't
of
vote
just.
for you.
Yeah,
What was
that's
that?
right. You did vote
I
for
didn't
Kings.
vote for you.
I didn't vote for you.
Well, here's
Do you
something
vote for police?
No, you don't. Here's something that I
Of course you
thought
don't.
was kind of interesting. That I just thought of was the fact that we were talking that they could only do such and such if they got the Lord Summer something.
Summerisle.
Yeah,
Okay.
he is
Lord Summerisle.
Summerisle, yeah. They could only do such and such if they got Lord Summerisle's permission, which, despite them, I think, trying to put themselves in the category of a legitimate religion, based on what was practiced for centuries before the advent of Christianity. I think that their model tends to fit that of a cult a lot closer because of the charisma and leadership and absolute authority of a singular human figure who who they depend on for everything.
Right.
The big difference though is that his he is a third generation leader in this society, as opposed to, like, say, Jim Jones, who obviously didn't have the chance to pass on his legacy, and not that there was a legacy to pass on because everyone died, but you know what I mean. So it's a different it's a slightly different turn on the classical cult construct, but it's definitely there.
Right, and that plays out a lot when we meet. So he goes to Summerisle's mansion. Yeah. I'm echoing. He goes to Summerisle's estate to ask for the permission in the next scene, and that's where we. That's where we finally get like a longer look at Christopher Lee's character, who kind of runs away with the movie from this point. What were you
As
going
Christopher Lee tends to do.
Well, what were you going to say, Jake?
At what point?
I thought you were starting to make a point, and then we lost you.
He was the source of the echo.
Oh.
Christopher Lee Beyond the Grave was the source of the echo?
Yes. Yeah.
I had a friend who was
Well, he said he loved this movie, so I could see him trying to get in on the conversation.
Maybe. I had a friend who was convinced he was a vampire and was like really upset when he actually died.
Well, if they were convinced he was a vampire, they wouldn't believe it died, would they?
He was a weird kid.
Well, was this pre-Hammer horror?
I don't think so. This was 73.
Okay, so this.
So actually, in some of the interviews, they said that Christopher Lee himself was kind of tired of being like that kind of villain.
Apparently, The Wicker Man was his favorite film that he'd ever done.
Yeah, he was really proud of it. And you can kind of see why when you get when we finally have like a long discussion with Summerisle at the estate. So a little bit of
the estate. What did you think of the estate itself?
Well, what's funny about Lord Summerisle is that he reminded me a lot of Scaramanga in The Man with the Golden Gun, which he also, Christopher Lee also played that character. Same kind of thing. He has his own island. He's a very charismatic figure. He gives the intimidating speech to the hero right before, the climax, and just that immediately went through my head.
And the movie also features Britt Eklund. And this is 2 years later after that one came out?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of funny. Yeah.
And yet no bees
No bees.
on the
But
entire
we
state.
got
About
apples.
his island, though. I mean, this is supposed to be off the Scottish Isles, right?
Yeah.
And they said something about it being enveloped by a warm current or some such thing, but the landscaping on his villa would not have jogged with an apple orchard at all. It was
Well,
a little bit warm.
trying to get back on track. So when he finally meets Summer Isle, like they have a discussion where Summer Isle explains the history of the island. His grandfather was a Victorian scientist who developed a strain of apples that will actually grow on the island. And that was kind of what he used to get the local people to start working for him and like found the community. And it just seems to kind of have grown from there.
Which isn't that interesting that something that has a scientific basis to it then goes and evolves into a pagan religious / cult atmosphere, which interestingly enough, a lot of what was considered a cult centuries ago was what we would consider today kind of the prototypes for a lot of scientific thought.
I mean, if you're talking about Jim Jones and comparisons of Christopher Lee's character, I don't know who, but in a way, I don't consider that as big a comparison, because it really wasn't Christopher Lee's character that brought the whole thing as far as the religion to the island. It was his relatives that basically freed the islanders of oppression. If you listen to the story that he tells in the scene, and so in a way, it was the islanders who converted Christopher Lee's family, and really he is more of a servant of them and following their lead instead of them following his, which is to me an interesting way of reversing that in that sense.
Yeah, and if you listen to how Summer Isle describes, the history of the island, and you kind of get like a little bit of insight into what he believes. And I've heard the case made that maybe he may actually be an atheist. Like you can kind of tell he's like, oh yes, the old gods, they work. They're quaint. Like he seems sort of passively amused.
I think he's more
by
of
paganism.
I think he's kind of a pragmatist in the guise of someone who is I don't think he's a fanatic by any means. I think that he sees that the system that was established from his grandfather to his father to him, that it works. If it's kind of like, if it works for you, meaning the people, if it works for them, then great. Who am I to rock the boat, really?
Exactly. We get that. He more or less says that, maybe not quite so directly, but it's in there. I mean, it's probably the best scene with it. Well, I don't know. That's probably a bold claim that it's the best scene with Lee's character.
Yeah,
but you get a lot of good stuff in there.
It is telling though, because I wouldn't say he's the definition of an atheist is someone who not only doesn't believe in God or gods, but someone who believes that there is no way that believes that it's provable, or that it's not. It's with agnosticism, that there's no way that one can know.
Well, that's not necessarily the correct definition, but we can fight about that later off air.
The point is that I think he's someone who is ultimately a pragmatist at heart. I don't think that he's as dismissive as he might be otherwise if he was purely just using them or manipulating them.
Well, I mean, you got to admit he's probably had a pretty fun life there. we get like a little bit of insight into that too. On the way to the estate, how we get another folk song for the fire leap. So like he sees a bunch of naked women dancing in a stone circle and like jumping over a fire, and it's some kind of old fertility rite. And he complains about it to Summerisle, and it's in kind of one of the funnier moments of the movie. He's like, they're naked and dancing around. It's like, and he's like, oh, I trust the sight of the young people refreshes you. It does not. It's like, but they're naked. It's like, well, naturally, it's much too dangerous to jump through the fire with your clothes on. And he kind of doesn't have anything to say to that. And it's like, well, yeah, he's right.
Yeah.
Anybody else get a good laugh from that?
Well,
Uncle, yes.
Yes.
I kept thinking to myself when the girls were dancing naked around that, that stone temple or whatnot.
Stone circle.
Well, yeah, I kept thinking about the Salem witch trials for some reason, because the thing that starts that is how all these girls are dancing naked in the woods, and even though I know it's kind of perpendicular to this, but I kept getting the feeling like, okay.
I suppose how we would kind of make an inference with like witchcraft from that.
Yeah,
well, that's a good insight. I hadn't considered that before.
So,
Well, I mean, witchcraft, paganism, occultism, they often get
more
lumped
or
together.
less kind of the same thing.
Well, they get
I
lumped
demonstrate
together, which,
your whole point.
well, they more or less get lumped together, and they don't necessarily even belong together. I think you can subdivide quite a lot, but
oh yeah. So speaking back to how Summerisle's probably enjoyed his status as the master of this island, when Howie gets further indignant, Christopher Lee just kind of smiles and like walks over to the piano and plays a few notes of the song they're singing, and it's like, oh, this happens a lot. He's probably gone out there before. Slightly creepy, but okay.
what do we think about that blonde teacher as being? I got a sense like she was
kind of like a priestess at the ceremony. Like we see her in that dress before again too. Like she seems to have a lot of the people in this community seem to have kind of a regular job / role, and then something to do with like the rites that they observe.
Isn't it interesting that in the Abrahamic religions, how the emphasis on the the practitioners is always, it tends to be heavily male, priest, rabbi, imam, and then with these people and with druids and stuff, you do have priestesses. I think that's interesting.
Well, even ancient Egyptians had priestesses in their hierarchy as well. Of course, they also had this insatiable obsession with cats too, but that's really different.
Right, and well, anyway, so after all that dialogue, so like Christopher Lee Lord Summerisle kind of messes with Howie a little bit longer, and he's like, "Are you going to give me permission or not to dig up the corpse or not?" And it's like, "I thought I already did." Rah! And so he finally does it, and when they open up the coffin, there's a hair in the coffin. Just another one of the many kind of pranks that they play on him while he's here. So I kind of got a laugh from that. How did you guys react?
I didn't get it. It confused me. It made sense later, but I was confused when it happened.
Yeah, it was kind of strange.
I thought it was some sort of mystical religious thing at the time that I first watched it. I mean, I understood what was the second time I watched it because I understood the movie fully. But while watching it in a dazed and incomplete state, my mind was looking like maybe it's some sort of weird mysticism where they bury animals that they feel the spirit animal of the person when they die.
Wow. Even when super sleep deprived, you put somewhat more thought into that than I did.
That
No,
was
there was.
thought.
Didn't they make
Well-
a reference before about her transfiguration or something like that?
Oh, so
Yeah.
what happens with that is like in kind of a rage, Sergeant Howie goes back to Summer Isles Manor and he like throws the hair at their feet
Yeah.
and like, what's this kind of feeling to it,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, Rowan loved the March Hares. And they're kind of mocking him a little. It's like, oh, you could say it's a transubstantiation. Like they're just like throwing kind of like Christian concepts at him.
But let's also keep in mind that there's two things about March hares that we can infer from that, which is number one, the hares or rabbits, that they multiply, very quickly. They're very fruitful creatures. Number one, and then number two, there's the expression "mad as a March hare," so that's tying into how he's feeling about these people.
So that kind of relates to one of my favorite lines from Sergeant Howie. Do not think that I can be made a fool of indefinitely.
Oh, but you can. And of course, the March Hare brings up association. Well, Matta's March Hare also brings up association with Alice in Wonderland. And you could say Howie at this point is going well down the rabbit hole.
Well, he is.
Yeah.
So they kind of just kind of keep screwing with him like that night when. So now we were getting a bit ahead of ourselves before when we talked about Willow's song. So he goes back to the hotel, and Willow tries to seduce him by singing a really sensual song, like through his door and like banging on his wall. So whenever people talk about this movie, a lot of them mostly just remember that, at least in my experience. So aside from what we already covered, like, what do you guys think about that scene?
It was weird as hell.
I thought it
But
was.
I was digging it.
It was kind of creepy.
I actually thought I have a different take on it, but that was one I didn't get until the second time I watched it, which was, to me, I considered that there was, in her mind, she was feeling sorry for him and that there was a connection that she felt with him. And this was her reaching out to him to try and save him, to try and help him.
Well, I think that might be part. I hadn't quite considered that before. Because
I kind
think,
of thought about that too. Like, was she trying to get him laid before he died or something?
I think
Do him a solid.
trying to test him.
Yeah, I think it was more in line with a test. Like, but if he had actually gone for it, like, I think she would have been okay with that. Would have been happy with it too. Like, her character seemed a bit more sympathetic, like, towards him.
Honestly, I think they were the whole townsfolk were all trying to test him on his reactions to everything that they did. And ultimately what they decided to do with him is based on how he reacted to begin with.
Well, yeah, the whole thing is temptation.
Correct.
And, a test. And then that's why it's my favorite scene, without a doubt. Because, now, first of all, the music's great. It's
even Christ was supposedly tempted by the devil himself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
there's that, plus like the Book of Job, which is all about
and you can
suffering.
tell how he's kind of really struggling with it too. Like, she almost gets him to come over to act. She actually almost gets him to come over because like he's like up against that wall, like he's sweating. He's like, no.
Well, that's.
You're there.
Well, first of all, they picked a really, really beautiful actress to play that part. There's that, to give the temptation some authenticity, but then also, I found it particularly refreshing because, well, number one, it's a temptation between walls, so it's like exactly what's going on, but it's like you don't have to physically be in the same room for it to work, for the scene to work. And then number two, it's a refreshing the fact that he is the police character and he doesn't go for the person who's set up to be the love interest or the one who he beds midway through. Like I'm so glad that they just didn't go with that because I've seen that cliche in so many movies and it's like these people don't really like each other. They're just there because movie, I guess. And so luckily not only did they not do that here, but they made him not giving in like a pretty integral part of the movie and his character.
Everything in the film is deliberate and ends up having like a purpose later. So that's one of the things that's so nice about the plot of this is that basically everything we see matters in some way, like whether it's Howie picking up on some clue or having so and so experience, like everything serves a purpose. And so the purpose of this, as we later discover, is to test Howie to see if we'll get to that. Kind of a funny thing, Britt Eklund actually had a butt double for this, so that's her, like when they show her from above the waist, like that's her, but when her face is away from the camera and we're seeing her butt, like that's a body double that they got for, I'm still not quite sure why that was necessary.
Well, I mean, some people have one and not the other,
Just like different pieces of ass.
Well, she was complaining about it in an interview that people will send her pictures of that other girl's butt for her to sign, and she's like, that's not me. What was that, Jake?
Well, I had read that that part that you were saying. I'd read that she apparently was a few weeks pregnant and she was real self-conscious, and that's why she didn't want to do some of those scenes.
Oh, and I remember now. Yeah, you're right.
She was actually kind of pissed that the producers hired a butt double. They didn't tell her about it. Yeah, so that was kind of interesting.
Okay, so the producers put in something in the end that an actress didn't know about. So what about that reason why this film almost never got to see the light of day?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the producers were really like you could make a pretty long documentary about like all the bizarre problems that this film had. It was almost like fate was out to get it. Which kind of adds to the mystique, I think, of the movie. But anyway, so the next day, she's almost kind of disappointed. So it's kind of tying into the, maybe she felt sorry for him thing. Like the next day, she seems genuinely disappointed that he didn't come over. I mean, we know it's an act, but at the same time, it's really convincing.
See, I think there's a lot of, like I said, I do think that there is a connection that she has with him throughout. They're little things, little gestures, eye contact, nonverbal cues, and small verbal cues throughout the film that indicate that there was potentially a little bit more. As I said, I feel like that was not just a test, but her trying to reach out to him. Which later in the movie that makes more sense as to why I say it would be reaching out to him.
Well, let's not forget that their culture is one where, a casual, fling is nothing to be ashamed of. Yeah.
And almost, openly celebrated from what we saw before. So anyway, so his investigation continues. Like he goes to the library and he's doing some reading about. So it's May Day, which is the big holiday which is the big pagan holiday for like the upcoming like growing season. And so he's reading about like May Day traditions, and he reads about like the procession that's going to take place later that day, and kind of it's like an expositional scene that explains, just what the hell is going on for the going into the finale of the movie. It talks about how the procession is led by, several different characters. Like there's the man woman played by the community leader or priest, and like the half man half animal, which is like this hobby horse thing, and Punch, the fool for a day, and explains like the purpose of like these of the rites. And that's where Howie realizes, reading this, it's like and then at the end of the procession, like sacrifices are made, and he's like, oh, and he like figures it out. Rowan's not dead, she's being held somewhere as the sacrifice. So he immediately leaves the library and tries to go back to the mainland for backup, but somebody sabotaged his plane. And then the movie starts to really kind of kick it up in terms of pacing. So you start to see the townsfolk just kind of appearing everywhere with their parade costumes on, which are generally like animal masks. So there are some really creepy like hair masks in this.
I like the part where he's going to the plane to check it out, and they like put the masks on, and they bend down. And it's like they're almost playful with him,
Oh yeah, they've been screwing with him the entire time, and now they're not being subtle about it anymore.
Yeah, that whole third act is where that place, that island, goes from being quaint.
Unsettling.
Well, it's
to...
like quaint and free love. Ooh, look at us, to like weird, creepy, and then now it's like full on creepy.
Okay.
Yeah, they look like splicers from BioShock, if anybody's familiar with that. And so, in his desperation to find Rowan, he starts doing like a door-to-door search. And that doesn't necessarily go very well. Like, basically everywhere he goes, like, somebody messes with him. Like, at one point he opens the cabinet and, like, what looks like a body falls out, but it's just some girl playing a prank on him. Anybody else get any enjoyment out of that whole montage?
That was probably my favorite part of the whole movie, actually.
Yeah?
The play dead
Yeah,
movie.
that whole montage where he's going through the houses and looking for her and sort of chasing that half man, half horse thing.
Yeah, just set to like nursery rhymes. Kind of amp up the creepy factor. Anyway, while he's out doing that, he's going by the staging point for the procession, and so Lord Summerisle gives a speech. It's like, okay, so we're going to line up at blah 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 at 3 o'clock. So and so is going to wear this costume. Just kind of.
And then he dresses in drag and leaves the procession. So.
Well, he's the community leader, so he basically just puts on a wig, and I don't know. I kind of like Christopher Lee's like look in the wig. It's sort of unsettling it's hard to describe. But anyway, so he overhears their plan, and he returns to the inn, and so he pretends to like take a nap or whatever, and he overhears the innkeeper and Willow whispering. It's like, okay, we'll knock him out. It's like, we just need him asleep for the ceremony. And so what he does is he kind of beats them to it. So he knocks out the innkeeper and steals the innkeeper's costume, which just happens to be the fool. So there's kind of some fun symbolism there. And he just joins the parade, and you get to see the procession that was described in the book. And there's kind of a like in the next scene, like we find out like they know it's him in that costume, and they're not acknowledging it, but they're kind of messing with him anyway. Like Lord Summerisle is like, "You're supposed to be the fool. Act like it. Cut some capers," and like they make him like jump around during the procession.
Now, question though, like with the scene with the innkeeper and Willow, it's pretty clear that they're, well, once you see later on, it becomes pretty clear in retrospect that they're whispering just loud enough that he's bound to hear them. You know, at least if he is awake, they're going to hear them. But like, I'm kind of wondering, like, if they had expected him to knock out the one guy and take his costume, or
Well, they were counting on it.
yeah,
Like, they're actually whispering it in his direction.
It does leave a lot to chance that you would expect it. But then again, I guess because I was going to comment on the previous scene where he's going door to door.
Go ahead.
I feel like he was pretty much breaking and entering again and again and again. You know, was that unreasonable search and seizure sort of thing?
Yeah. But by then he had been outraged religiously enough to not give a shit anymore.
He's like, fuck
there
these people.
wasn't really anything right with the town anyway, so he was like, if they're not going to worry, I'm not going to proceed lawfully.
I am the law.
No.
Which I have to admit,
like Ezra, I am the law, and the law is not mocked.
It's not like he wishes he was as cool as Judge Dredd. Yeah. But anyway, so after the procession concludes, turns out he was right, and you know, Rowan is there at the sacrificial altar, or I feel like there was an altar, and so he basically throws off his mask, like punches somebody out, and like rescues her. Like they escape into these caves, and then we finally get like our big twist as they escape. Rowan led him right to Summer Isle. The entire thing was an elaborate trap for him. Like they wanted him for the sacrifice the entire time, and every clue that he found, like everything that happened to him, was intentionally left for him to find, or he was steered to it. Like the entire thing was a game, and that's actually we opened with Lord Summer Isle's line from that scene. It's like, "Welcome, fool. You have come to the appointed place. The game is over."
Well, they kind of had to lead him because he really wasn't a very good cop.
You know, he really wasn't.
Well, what's interesting actually about the climax there with him rescuing her is that is literally the classical, well, certainly in film, climax scenario. The morally upstanding hero saves the damsel in distress from the evil villains who are so foreign from the hero, and they make a dramatic escape, except not only are they caught, but the whole thing was a giant ruse.
Exactly, and like right, you know something is really wrong. Like the first time I saw that scene, and Rowan runs right to Lord Summer Isle. Did I do it right? You did it beautifully, and they like hug it, and I'm sitting there like, uh-oh.
But you also get thrown a little bit off beforehand because I don't know, I don't want to blame it on the actress, but I felt that when she first meets him, "Oh, Mr. Policeman, thank you. I didn't want to do this." Just it rang very false. And
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
It did. It rang. It was kind of the same for me too.
Yeah.
But you feel that again, they've kind of been able to dupe him at like every turn. So plus she was kind of like, you know, how was my performance? So I think it plays just fine.
Right.
Despite the way it's delivered, that may even have been intentional.
That's what I was saying. Like it could well have been intentional. It just if it is, that's a very interesting little thing. That was like the one, because everyone else's performances seem so natural and everything for the most part. But yeah, I admit the twist was interesting. It was a lot of fun when the twist came, and I was like, that's what they were building up to.
Like, well, if you weren't ready for it, I mean, it would have. If you didn't know about it and you weren't ready for it, like it would have blown your mind pretty hard. So, like, they consider him like they consider him a prime sacrifice because he has a different religion. Like, he's a virgin. He has like all these other qualities that they think will make him perfect.
Well, you see, and I didn't know about the twist ending when I first saw it. I'd only heard rumors of the Nicolas Cage remake, and that this is supposed to be a really big horror movie, with a really cool twisted ending, and I didn't know what the heck it was or there. So
Yeah,
that ending was it's like, oh my goodness, this is what's going on.
Yeah, they did not do a good job in that remake.
They had
what?
I find the Wicker Man remake a little bit more entertaining than it is and laughable.
There's a 2-minute supercut. There's a 2-minute supercut of all the Nicolas Cage scenes from that movie on YouTube. See that. Don't see the actual movie.
The supercut is definitely worth watching, though.
Yeah. So, Hey, Katie, did you know about the twist when you saw this, since you were like a first-time viewer?
No, I did not. I mean, I knew there had to be. I was waiting for something to happen. Like, I figured it was burning kind of slow, so I figured something was coming. But no, I didn't. I didn't expect that twist. Really, I think kind of right before it happened. Once he sort of ran out of options, like, okay, well, so clearly this girl wasn't missing, and like, what's going on here? And then finally it dawns on you. But yeah, I didn't see it coming, and I didn't know about it. Like, it hadn't been spoiled for me, so.
So it actually worked on you?
It did.
The first time I saw this, it definitely worked on me. I mean, when I first saw it, I mean, when you see it again, I mean,
you still feel something.
It's like every time I see this movie, you see something different.
Yeah, that's why I had such a strong spoiler warning, because I mean, I wish I hadn't had the ending of this spoiled for me. Like, I think I would enjoy this movie even more if the twist hadn't been spoiled by Bravo, of all places.
Yeah, I went into it blind without knowing about the twist, and I think that was a good plan.
Exactly, it does take a lot of the punch out of it. I mean, like, the finale is still pretty gut wrenching. Like, there's some really amazing acting from Ed Woodward in that scene. Like, he seems genuinely terrified. Like, when it's like he has the realization that it's like what's about to happen doesn't really register for him at first. He's like indignant, like, get out of my way. And then they restrain him and like change his clothes. And he starts to realize, it's like, uh-oh. And then like his reaction to, they bring him over the hill and he sees the Wicker Man. Like, that line, oh God, oh Jesus Christ.
Well, that was his first time seeing it. So that.
What's interesting is the guy who, Edward Woodward would go on to later play in a very good British show called The Equalizer. And he was the main character for that show. So much so that Denzel Washington reprised the role.
That's kind of neat.
See, I didn't realize that was based on a British TV show. When I was reading that title, I was like, I wonder if they're related. But yeah, it was. I do have to say this, though. I did not have that much sympathy at all for Howie. I did not. By the time that happened, I was kind of like, oh, good. I like this ending.
Well, I mean, there is one of the things I think that really sells it is he seems to kind of have a realization. It's like he's telling them, no, don't you understand? Your gods aren't real. They're not real. And he seems to have kind of a moment where he like pauses, where he's like, wait, they believe enough in their gods, to kill someone for them. does that mean, and their gods aren't real, does that mean, like, it's not really stated, but you get almost an impression like he has a moment of doubt about his own faith.
I think he has the realization that, I think he's still got his faith at the end, but I think that he also realizes that he's going to die. And so he tries to essentially give himself the non-priestly equivalent of last rites, like a final pleading, because, this is it. There's no turning back. And so, it's basically now or never. And, no matter how faithful you are, unless you're, a monk burning yourself alive in the street, for most of us, and certainly in the Western world, I think, being faced with your imminent death, and a horrible one at that, would make you really consider everything in, fractions of a second. And the fact that I think he does realize that, what you're saying, but I also think that he is just considering his own mortality combined with his own devotion, but also realizing that it's okay to be afraid of death, because there's one of the things that they tell you if you're really devout, or if you, it's like people will say things like, I know where I'm going, they'll say things like that as
he tries it. He tries it on them too.
Well, it's supposed to be a means of assurance for themselves and for others, but to me anyway, whenever people say that, it always comes across as arrogant. But
he does try that on the crowd. It's like, I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and the life everlasting, and the rebuttal to that is good. For believing what you believe, we give you a rare gift these days, a martyr's death. It's like, oh shit.
They kind of turn that on, but they are kind of, in a way, almost mocking that. It's like, well, then good, you're getting the best death of all for your religion. You're being able to
fully agree. And then they even give him the little speech, you will sit with Christ next to the throne, or whatever whatever the bullshit that they used to tell me at Christian school was, if you died a martyr's death.
The thing is that it's like, on the one, I do think they say it in a mocking way, but at the same time, it's like, that is what happens when you are devout for your faith, in this case specifically for the Christian faith. But as I demonstrated with the monk in where was that? Sorry, my mind.
The monk in Vietnam who burns himself.
That's right. Couldn't remember the country, I was blanking. But the point is that there are people who, and in that case it was committed upon himself, but the point is that people are fully committed to their faith to such a degree that they will be willing to suffer the worst death imaginable. So it can make you do extraordinary things and endure extraordinary things. And so in that way, it's kind of an ironic way of giving him exactly what the inevitable result of that devout faith is,
Right. Although, I mean, the reason I kind of drew the, having doubts about his faith is because if he genuinely believes all that stuff, why is he so clearly terrified? So that's sort of where my perspective comes from.
Burned alive. That's a terrifying way to go, no matter what you think.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that you can, that's an argument you can make. I personally would come down on the side of that no matter how, I don't think it is a sign of weakness to say that you are afraid to die or afraid of death, or at least the process of death. Regardless of what comes after death, it's like, well, the process of death itself is,
well, I mean, I'm sure it's gonna hurt, but well, you kind of get my point. But
hey guys, can I jump in really quick? I actually have to go.
Sure.
Because I have to get up really early in the morning.
Yeah, we kind of digressed a bit too much, so sorry about
Just
that,
a
Katie.
little bit. But I did want to just give a shout out that I'm going to be at Days of the Dead this weekend competing in the FX Makeup Challenge on Saturday night. So if anybody's going to Days of the Dead that's listening, make sure you say hi to me. I'll be there all weekend, Friday through Sunday, and competing in the Makeup FX Challenge on Saturday night. So come cheer me on.
This coming.
If you can,
Best
if
wishes.
you can take me with you,
I unfortunately
I
cannot.
need to.
it was worth a try. So, well, sorry to see you go. But you know, hopefully you got your thoughts across, and we weren't too
Yeah.
overblown.
I think so. And then I think next week we're doing Thanksgiving. Is that the
Yep.
film we
Are we?
decided on?
Oh, okay.
I think
Fun
so.
week.
But anyway, I will see you all next week.
Alrighty.
Good night.
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 Right.
Aw, man, we were almost done too.
Hmm.
Ah, well, I feel bad. Anyway, so after like these long philosophical speeches, you know, they finally throw him. You know, the big guy we saw from the bar earlier, who plays the half man, half animal. Like that guy's name is Oak, which is kind of funny because he's. I don't know. I laughed at that when I found that out. Like Oak just picks him up and like tosses him in the Wicker Man, and they lock it and burn it. And what really adds to the creepiness of the scene is, you know, they form a circle around the Wicker Man and they're like cheerfully singing like "Summer is a Cuban Inn."
You know what reminds me of that? You know what
Which is,
that them singing reminds me of? Every Who down in Whoville loves Christmas.
Kinda, yeah. It's sort of the same
Yeah,
tone.
you mean
When they're swaying side to side, that scene just kind of reminds me of the Who's.
Oh yeah, well, my mind immediately went there as well. But also, let's not forget it's that song juxtaposed against him trying to sing a hymn
tries to sing
version of the 23rd Psalm. Yeah.
Yeah, he tries to sing "The Lord is my shepherd," but he's just totally drowned out, and he kind of gives up on it.
Well,
And
his lungs
like-
are probably too messed up.
And he has a final moment where he's praying. It's like, I'm so afraid, and he like screams to Jesus as the flames engulf him, and it's really intense and makes you feel kind of like dirty almost. Like it's such an emotionally powerful scene. Like even if you don't believe in any of the things that are being presented, it's like, ugh. And then
Well, and
we get a
that is the thing that it's about, is that, it's that, faith in something, whether it's Christianity or this Celtic form of paganism, belief, the power of belief can
exactly.
the power of belief can make people do extraordinary things, extraordinarily good things, extraordinarily generous things, extraordinarily brave things, extraordinarily cruel, horrible, genocidal things. It's just the fact that people have belief that is powerful. It's a very, there are a lot of movies that talk about that, but that's a interesting way to frame it up with very contrasting accounts of that.
Right, and why does that always happen when I'm about to say something? Good lord. Sorry about that, everybody.
Christmas was filmed in 1966, and this was filmed in 73. I almost wonder if that ending scene with them
if they took the idea from
is where they took the idea from. So.
I just wanted to make I wanted to make a quick note on the song that they sing. It's like one of the oldest known English songs, like about like summer regrowth. The lyrics are kind of hard to make out, but it's along the lines of like grows the seed, brews the mead, or stuff like that. Like I have the lyrics somewhere in my giant note sheet, which I've managed to lose. Good work, Dustin. We're not.
Yeah, and you were
Which,
saying something?
yeah, very, very quickly. The version that you, David, sent us, that version had a text in the very beginning that said that the producers wanted to thank Lord Summerisle for his help in depicting their religion or whatever. Is that supposed to be like a call for like a semi-documentary, like authenticity kind of thing, or I don't know.
I think so. I know that was on some cuts, like almost as a gag. I thought it was at the end of the final cut, but I didn't notice it myself. But then again, I was kind of busy like writing, so I didn't pay too much attention. But that was something like deliberate that they did to. I don't know if a documentary. I don't know if they were trying to frame the movie as a documentary or if they were just trying to make a joke. Because I've kind of heard both accounts, honestly.
Well, like for example, it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Anton LaVey, who was a technical consultant on The Devil's Reign with William Shatner.
Okay,
so,
that one.
And that might have come after this movie, but the point is that perhaps it was trying to get at something along those lines.
Possibly. But anyway, so they burn him in the Wicker Man and complete the sacrifice. There is a moment before that we almost missed there when he's making his case to the village. It's like, don't you understand? The crops failed because your strains failed. Apples aren't supposed to grow on this island.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of makes a prophecy. It's like, if they fail again next year, then only the Lord of only the Lord of the island will do. And Christopher Lee has kind of his face kind of drops for a moment. And he's like, if the crops fail again, they will probably come after me.
Mm.
And then he has kind of a shakily voiced, I know they won't.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that also shows that his faith, which we were kind of tossing back and forth, may or may not be genuine or maybe more pragmatic than
Ben Sincere.
Well, fervent.
That's
or
the
fanatical. Certainly not fanatical.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the point we talked about how it may or may not be those things, but it's for certain his own beliefs or his own capacity for faith is definitely being tested there, rhetorically.
Yeah, well, that's one of the pieces of evidence that people use for, he's not like a true believer. He's just kind of in it for, well, all the reasons we said previously. But the final shot of the movie is really awesome. So they were able to, they kind of lucked out. So as the Wicker Man is burning, like it starts to collapse and the head falls away to reveal the sunset. And in one of the supplements that I was able to see, they were talking about like shooting that where, they were filming like the thing burning and all of a sudden somebody's like, get the camera and like point it over there. And they're like, what? And then that's how they got that shot. Or at least that's how the story was told. I might be confusing it with something else, but I thought that was kind of a fun little, it's like, oh yeah, one of the greatest shots in the movie was something of an accident. Like, could you imagine like wanting to include a shot like that from the beginning and then trying to like plan for it? You get like one chance every day. They only had 2 Wicker Men to burn too. So
Well,
but anyway, so getting on to the
sorry, I had my microphone muted. I was seeing a lot of a lot of great movie shots are one and dones. Like the burning of Atlanta and Gone with the Wind. Those were all old RKO sets. That were not really being needed anymore, so they burned them down. And then the final shot of The Last Temptation of Christ, the casing on the camera was loose and sun got in the film and essentially ruined that section of film, but it was so perfect and it was so perfectly timed for the symbolism of that ending that they left it in.
Yeah. And so a little bit of background on the Wicker Man. So I think we already kind of shared that, but the Wicker Man was a real practice. Although there's a little bit of uncertainty about that because, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of the information comes from Roman writers. The Romans were kind of looking for any propaganda to use against the Celts at the time, from what I read. And so there's a chance that maybe the Wicker Man wasn't quite widespread a tradition. There has been some evidence found that things were burned in Ireland, but it's kind of, I don't know, it was kind of inconclusive when I tried to look up real Wicker Men. I mean, there's Burning Man in Nevada, but pretty sure they're not putting any humans in that.
Well, there's been a lot of forms of execution, and let's not forget,
and then human sacrifice too.
Well, let's not forget the Romans' execution method du jour was crucifixion. Let's not forget that. I mean, one of many. They had lots, but then there's that. Plus, later on in Middle Ages, burning at the stake, and then if there's one thing that human beings have done pretty consistently across the centuries is we've found increasingly interesting and creative methods of killing each other.
Yes, indeed.
I think the fire is fine.
Nice and simple.
So, getting to some of the production stuff I was able to learn. So, one of the reactions to that ending from some of the producers, I'm not sure who was being interviewed. I think it actually was the director telling the story. He was watching it with them, and they were like, "Well, okay, now does the cavalry come?" And then a little bit of a pause. It's like, "That's it? Jesus, it's a bit heavy, don't you think?" And I thought it was really, really funny. It's like, don't you think that ending's a little much? It's like, no, it's fine.
It's good. It's good.
All right, so we've already touched a lot on characters, so we probably don't have quite too much to say here. But well, Christopher Lee kind of runs away with it. Almost all of his lines are awesome and quotable, so it was kind of hard to pick, just what to repeat from him.
Mm-hmm.
And then aside from a handful, there really weren't that many characters that got specific screen time.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, there are just a lot of bit players, but they don't really have too much depth of their own. But then again, they're not really supposed to.
One of the characters that ended up being two people, which was Aubrey Morris, and he was in Clockwork Orange. Aubrey Morris, he played the grave digger and the old gardener. The one that he comes across in the grave of Rowan, and he's the only one that kind of knew, or kind of just didn't hide the fact that, oh yes, Rowan is.
Oh yeah, she's in there. It's like, what?
So, but he's actually evidently in quite a few things. Bordello Blood.
Oh really?
Yeah. Project Shadow Chaser 3. Was in the Tales from the Crypt series.
Wow, he did a lot of horror. Holy crap.
Yeah. But it was different. Since I
Okay, I think we're probably talked out on characters unless anybody else had anything quick to add.
Not particularly. One thing, not specific characters, but in terms of general, I did like the naming conventions. How most of the characters on the island had basically like floral names. Thought that was kind of like you guys mentioned oak earlier, but yeah,
Okay.
I did like that. I thought that was kind of cool.
It's like, why is he called Oak? Oh, he's like 6'8". Oh, got it.
And
Yeah, well, I hope it
let's
wasn't
not
one of your
forget
things, but
that the two names of the children that were the outliers were two that were found also in the Bible. You know, as which in again in Western culture, names from the anglicized versions of names from the Bible are pretty common. And then you had these other names like Rowan and those sound like much more natively Celtic names.
Yeah, that was like a quick moment during like one of his library visits that we didn't go into like a ton of detail on. So he's asking around about, oh, who's buried where, and so the names are like Sarah and something else, and he's like, oh, so they're Christian names, and the lady is like, well, they were very old. It's like, oh,
yeah,
kind of like another like kind of screwing with him moment.
yeah.
But getting away from character, so there weren't necessarily a whole lot of special effects in this movie. Rather than so when they did the Wicker Man effects, so they had, I think they only had two Wicker Men. Like one was smaller and the other one was like the full-sized one that they were like putting him in. And so they had to really get the shots of the thing burning right, and they did a pretty good job. I'm not sure if they even had to burn the other one. My memory on that is particularly fuzzy, so sorry if I end up being wrong. So feel free to be mad at me in the comments if so. So the movie was shot on location in Scotland, like getting back to kind of the travelogue feel of it. Like it is gorgeous country. However, this is supposed to take place in May, and they ended up shooting it in the winter. And for a lot of the big scenes where people were outside, for a lot of the big crowd scenes, like outside, like especially at the end, they had to put ice cubes in the actors' mouths so you couldn't see like the mist of their breath because it was so cold. And they had to bring in like fake foliage too, like in the scene with the fire leap, where it's kind of like a long shot, like moving along rows of apple trees. There are guys like picking up the trees behind the camera and running them and putting them like in front of the camera to kind of keep the long track going. They got a note of back to the Wicker Man itself. They got a note of concern from like local villagers, like, you're not gonna burn the animals in that thing, are you? And they sent like a tongue-in-cheek letter back. It's like, we are only going to burn pandas, chinchillas, and they just like picked out they just named like whatever silly animals they could think of, and managed to not get in trouble for that. Oh, there was a good quote from. They were interviewing one of the actresses. I think it might have been Ingrid. Oh my god, I forgot her last name. They were interviewing one of the female actresses, and quote, I've never been so cold other than in the war. Which I thought was kind of amusing. It's like, been in the war? Oh. Ugh. Sounds like a much rougher time than I expected.
Well, one thing I just thought of was which this may tie into the remake a little bit, which I have not seen the remake. I've seen clips of it, and now that I know the original plot, I see the changes made, but like the apples growing there on the island is a fairly obvious tie into the Garden of Eden in a way, or the idea of a paradise that's untouched. And then, interestingly enough, with the remake, they changed the big export to honey, which that seems to be a more modern concern just because of the diminishing bee population.
Well, the remake is from like 2004 or 5, when I don't know if that was necessarily a problem yet.
It was 2006. I mean, I think it was on people's minds. I think it's only gotten worse since then. But I think it's kind of interesting how that's kind of a more ecological concern, I guess. The export ties into that, but then also apparently in the remake they changed it from a Celtic pagan society to more of a matriarchal society.
Yeah, well, we'll cover that in a bit, because I have a remake section here. We've already talked a lot about the music. I mean, the music is just like perfect and it sells everything. I mean, I can't think of any music that doesn't work. Like, can you guys?
No, I think it's a pretty awesome component of film.
Yeah, and I'm always happy to listen to it again too. So, and Sumer and the song they sing at the end, I found my information on it. It's the best they can trace it back to is something like 1240 something. Like, it is really old. And so there's a little bit of a tie in that. There's a Christian version of the song in Latin that doesn't really play into the film, but does give you a kind of an idea of, how old the traditions they're drawing from are, that they're using like the original version of it rather than like the anglicized one. So anyway, kind of jumping on to favorites. I know we all kind of said our favorite scene during the body of the plot, but we might as well quickly revisit them here. So, I mean, I personally love all of it, but if I really had to pick, I think it would probably be the scene where we are introduced to Lord Summer Isle, and he kind of lays out, it's like, oh yeah, this is what Ireland's about, this is what I believe, and kind of gives Sergeant Howie the business about Christianity. So I enjoyed that a lot, and I think if I really had to pick, that's what I'd go for my favorite scene. So, how about you guys?
Willow's song, I think, that whole thing, because I'm a big fan of anything dealing with temptation and with an internal struggle that's made external, and I think that was one of the best representations of that I've seen, and the music's really that particular song's really haunting, and that's a very abstract concept that I thought was handled very well.
Oh, good. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. How about you, Brandon?
To me, I always like the maypole scene. Just because it exemplifies the creepiness and eeriness and even etherealness of the movie, just in general.
I think I can go with that too. I think I listened to the Maypole song the most on the soundtrack. Like, it's just like weirdly catchy. And on that tree there was a limb, and on that limb there was a branch, and on that branch there was a nest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could sing maybe the whole thing. Good Lord, I have a problem. What about you, Jake?
Hard to say what a clear favorite would be. All the scenes you guys mentioned are high on there. Probably the very moment where they did that little twist at the end. That was probably the one part where I was the most like sat up and said, "Isn't that something?" I was invested in that moment more than I was most of the film, so it really caught my attention. And so, and of course, if not that one, then one of the scenes earlier with Lee, like you said, they're basically, I guess as they might say, kind of taking the piss out of the officer in terms of. I kind of like those scenes probably more than any of the others. So,
yeah, they're definitely some of. I think they're definitely some of Lee's best work. and it's just a shame that we couldn't get to see all of it.
Right.
Sorry about that. What about you, Dave?
Well, my favorite scene, I guess I would have to say is, the part where, what was that actress' name? Diane Salento's character, where she was the barmaid, and she enticed him from the other room for some reason. Even though I found that scene erotic at times, I thought that was done really well with the camera moves to show that, in a sense, that she was kind of like a siren in a sense.
Yeah, the same scene that Dane picked with Willow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
I
think
think there was a siren vibe from that too. I thought about mentioning that earlier and I didn't, but yeah, I was kind of thinking sirens too.
yeah, that's a good observation.
Did also anyone else know that the actress who played Willow was actually married to the screenwriter of The Wicker Man?
I think I remember hearing something about that. I definitely didn't remember on my own though. So
She also had been married to Sean Connery before, so evidently.
oh wow.
Are we still talking? Are you still talking about Diane Salento there?
Yep.
I think you got your actresses mixed up. Wasn't
Yeah,
it
that's Britt Eklund. I know she has like we said before, she has a butt double, but I don't know the butt double's name.
Yeah, Salento
That
was
might-
the one
That was Dan Salento?
No, she was the one that was married to those people he's talking about. She played
Okay.
Miss Rose, who I think wasn't that Summerall's
It seemed
lady
to be.
soon?
I think that was the priestess.
Yeah.
Or she's listed as the librarian. Which might not be correct. I mean, aside from the really distinct major characters, it's kind of hard to keep people's names straight in this, just
Well,
because they're not really mentioned all that much, you know?
Yeah, she's credited as Miss Rose. I think it was was it Kid or whatever her name was the librarian.
Eklund was
Yeah, I
Yeah.
kept mixing them up.
Willow.
Yeah.
Oh man, we kind of missed, like, there's sort of a cute moment where we see some of like the folk remedies that these people believe in. It's like the little girl has a cold and they put a toad in her mouth because
Yeah.
the toad, the happy toad will take the cold for you. And the little girl's like, it tastes icky, and like the adults kind of like keep it in there.
Yeah.
There, see? It's like, oh, that was weird.
Yeah.
He got
And-
to me an old sore throat.
And they let him see that too, just like to screw with him some more.
What? You got a frog in your throat?
Anyway, so kind of going on to our final section here. It's almost over.
Yeah.
You did it. You survived my incredibly long, perhaps too long.
Yeah.
But anyway, so let's see. What did we not cover in the body of this? So Christopher Lee was convinced that there was a whole conspiracy against the movie, which, after the stuff that happened that we discussed before with the producers and how things were cut, I think he was probably right.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, and especially it's unfortunate because again he had been a big booster almost from the start, and I think I read he did the movie for free, which is like.
I read that too.
It definitely shows some faith in the project if you're willing to do it for nothing. But yeah.
He was convinced that somebody like had the film somewhere and that it was like unlabeled or mislabeled, or that there was something keeping it from being like discovered and used. Another rumor I had heard was that it had been used as like landfill when they built some big highway.
Yeah, I read that too.
But it seems it's kind of one of those film mysteries that I don't think anybody will ever really know. And so we touched a little bit earlier on The Wicker Tree, which is there was meant to be some kind of trilogy where they weren't necessarily sequels or prequels or anything like that, but they were 3 stories with similar themes. And The Wicker Tree was kind of the first attempt at it. The Wicker Tree wasn't really that great, but it had kind of its own interesting things to say. But I think I would call it average at best. And if you really love The Wicker Man, you can give The Wicker Tree a try, but I wouldn't really expect you to be like enthralled by it. I do have kind of a funny personal thing related to it. So when I first saw The Wicker Tree, I had 2 friends at my undergrad school who looked. Well, The Wicker Tree, it's instead of one person being the person that's being the target, it's this couple that's kind of lured out to the countryside, and this couple looked almost exactly like these 2 friends of mine that I knew at the time who were also a couple. And it's like, hey, oh my god, I can't remember the names. It's like, hey, Drew, did you know you and Emily were in this movie I saw? It's like, oh wow, yeah. And I showed them like a picture of the characters, and they were like, and he was like, wow, they do look like us. Did we die? Yeah, you died pretty hard. Sorry. It was just kind of like a fun moment. Shout out to that guy if he's somehow still listening. And then let's try not to go into a 30-minute rant about how Nicolas Cage is the worst actor to ever live. But the infamous Nick Cage remake is among the worst movies ever made, which is kind of funny because it's a remake of one of the best movies ever made. It's like they picked a part of the spectrum and they stuck to it. Like, aside from that breathtaking 2-minute supercut of the craziest moments, oh my god, fuck that remake. Like, some people say that the Nightmare on Elm Street remake was bad. Like, that is a goddamn masterpiece compared to the utter I can't even, like, I'm just trying not to make it like a stream of cursing in my distaste for the Nicolas Cage one. Like, Not the Bees is funny, and we got some good memes. And I especially enjoy the thing where he's in the bear costume. He just like runs up to that lady and like whaps her. But aside from that, it's pretty fucking bad. Don't see it. A crime was committed against cinema.
At least,
all right, now who's going to pointlessly defend that movie to me?
well, I'm not going to defend it, but it was hilarious.
Well, I mean, I can defend Nicolas Cage a little bit. I don't think he's a hopeless actor. I think that he does have some remarkably good roles. This wasn't one of them, but he did have some. He has had some remarkably good roles.
I liked Con Air.
If he has a director who knows how to deal with crazy people and keep them reined in, he can be really good. But
he was good in Leaving Las Vegas and in Adaptation.
Oh, especially, both of those amazing.
And Raising
and he's in Mandy, which has been getting a ton of really positive buzz, but I haven't been able to watch it yet.
I'm sorry, but I still like him as the angel in what was that, City of Angels?
He played an angel?
Yeah, he played.
Never saw it. But
remaking it does not. Remaking the film, to me, in this day and age, it lost a lot of the factors that really made it what it was. I mean, it came out in 1973, according to what I've read on IMDb.
Yeah.
The same year as The Exorcist came out.
Mm-hmm.
So and I feel like it really was marketed to the same audience. The audience that fears The Exorcist should, in almost equal measure, have fear of this.
I keep. I'm sorry. Go finish your point.
The good God-fearing Christian man going into the heathen island to try and save a young girl, only to be disgusted and dismayed by their evil satanic ways, and then finally burned and destroyed by the corruption therein. To me, if you're looking at it from the perspective of somebody who would truly, deeply have had that offense level at The Exorcist, I feel that those same people would look at that movie and in that perspective, and that would probably be one of the major perspectives that was considered to be looked at back in those days.
So
in the
like
73.
So, like, that kind of makes me think. So, the people who listen to us know about my distaste for both The Exorcist and Psycho. And when it comes to both movies, there are similar movies from those time periods that I find that I really enjoy. So, I'm kind of wondering I wonder what cinema would look like today if instead of Psycho and The Exorcist taking off, what if Peeping Tom and The Wicker Man had taken off, like, in their places?
Not all that different in some aspects, but different in subtle means.
So I don't know. That's a discussion for another time because I feel it could get very long, but very, very interesting.
That was my original point I wanted to make way back at the beginning, but I thought this would be a better time to make it. But
yeah, well, we kind of spaced our sections out like through our plot breakdown. So I think we might have a longer running time than the actual movie at this point, though.
Yeah.
The remake, to me, it lost that because one, that crowd, again, as was said, I don't know if it was you, Dean, that said it. The idea of he was kind of missing that the concept of what is it relevant to today. That would be the shock culture. Back then, it was more of the free love culture would have been the shock culture of the time, but not in this time. So
the thing is,
well, keep in mind also who was making it, because that wasn't just any old person doing the remake. It was Neil LaBute, and Neil LaBute's work tends to be very dark and specifically aimed at the way that men, like these very hyper masculine men, like in The Company of Men, which was a early work of his, the way that they treat women and abuse them and things like that. So then you have the opposite situation where you have a full-fledged matriarchy where males are distrusted and devalued and everything, and kind of the dangers of that, to contrast with the toxic patriarchy argument. And this is coming from someone who hasn't actually seen that version. I just know that those were the changes that were made. Plus, what I already mentioned with the honey as kind of a modern ecological concern, as opposed to tying into the Garden of Eden. So, in other words, it's less about, seems to be less about differences of religion and belief, as opposed to matriarchy versus patriarchy, plus some small hints of ecological concerns.
Again, I feel like it fell far from the ability that this one displayed.
Well, yeah, without a doubt. But the point is that, like, could those changed focal points, with somebody like Neil LaBute, who has a very distinct background in covering those subjects, and could that have worked within that framework? Maybe. Was it necessary? No. Would it have worked better if it had been something else? Absolutely.
I'd like to see it.
It's like, but you know what I mean. It's like that kind of story. I think could be told, but was that the place to do it? Probably not.
I wasn't as incensed because even though I have been a fan of many films that have a cult base to them, where people will defend it to their natural glory. I understand that there's a religious fanatical way to the way some people worship certain films. Okay, they put certain films up on pedestals, and then they glorify it. Like, no one should remake that. No one. I say, hey.
Well, I mean, there are some movies where people make that argument, and it's like there is no good rebuttal. It's like you should never remake Back to the Future, and it's like they're right. Never remake that.
Exactly.
Well, and also, I know LaBute is he's known to be a bit of an acquired taste. I've not seen the remake of Wicker Man. The only two I've seen by LaBute are Nurse Betty and Death at a Funeral, and I loved both of those. But I know that both of them had their share of detractors too. So it's like his humor was not for everyone. And supposedly he played the remake as a comedy, which I'm sure would incense people that wanted to see more of a horror movie. But
anyway, I feel like we've given the remake far too more time than it deserves. So, there any quick emphasis on quick final thoughts?
My final thought is, I think we should visit the remake in the future and see what others.
I would like to visit it because I've never seen it, but I think it should be said. I want to throw my hat in the ring here. It should be said that, even if it didn't come out the way that one would have wanted, or even the way that Neil LaBute would have wanted, or whatever. I don't know what his intentions were necessarily, but it should be said that at the very least, someone who has a distinct flavor, albeit an acquired taste. It's like, at least be glad that the property got put in the hands of someone like that, as opposed to just any old person that got picked up off the street, more or less, to shepherd this material into existence.
Well, I mean, with the remake, I could, if they did pick somebody up off the street to write the remake, I would not be surprised in the slightest. But,
to write it, yeah. Let me check on that because I don't know actually who wrote the script.
You're gonna see if they just like found a homeless person to write the script.
Oh,
for the
actually,
remake.
no. It was Neil LaBute himself,
along with Anthony Schaefer, who was the original. So
I would like to have seen this I would have liked to seen it directed by Darren Aronofsky.
I think. Well, that's
kind of take creative head on it.
like
Give it the Suspiria treatment.
Well, that's something I think is kind of interesting about this, Dustin, for you specifically, is that you are very turned off by The Exorcist and Mother for their religious themes, and then here it doesn't seem to be bothersome, and yet I think that a lot of the same intelligent analyses are found in all three of those, albeit, they are trying to achieve very different things, but, it's like they're all there, all touch on those pretty essential themes,
Well, it's handled so much better in this one. Like with the other ones, it's like they're trying to hit you over the head with it.
Well, there definitely
and like all their points are
all
their points are clumsily made in the other ones, whereas in this one, like it's very succinct, it's very to the point, and
this one's also quite a bit more of a subtle, just film in general, as opposed to the other ones, which place a big emphasis on shock value, which I will absolutely concede that. I do think that there is a value for shock. I think is, it's like ultimately it's another way of saying surprise, and I think good art should surprise someone. But it's just, I do think that's it's a fair point to say this is definitely more subtle. But you could also say that if what you're looking for is something that shakes you to your core, it perhaps isn't quite that's not really what it's going for, their intentions are different, and how they go about it is different, but I don't think that they are, I think that they both use their themes to their intended effect in a way that is still thought-provoking, but that's just me.
Yeah, well,
in terms of subtlety and perhaps more nuance, then I would say, yeah, sure, I'll give you that for The Wicker Man.
Well, I would just say that The Wicker Man is a much smarter movie than those other two. Or, I don't know. I just think The Wicker Man works so much better at handling those kinds of themes. And I mean, I don't.
I think
I'm trying very hard not to go into a very long rant. But on that note,
I almost feel like we should ultimately put that on the list too, as to let that rant happen on the Wicker Man and revisit it in the future.
Well, that will happen on another day. So anyway, thanks for listening to our Wicker Man show. We're gonna do a real quick outro thing. So, who the hell are we? Well, I'm Dustin. I live here in Milwaukee and collect horror movies. So I have an Instagram for my horror collection at DHRHunter, all one word. And I've been hanging out a lot on Twitter as The Crypt of Horrors, which is the name of my upcoming collecting YouTube channel, where we hope to have interviews, reviews, and collection breakdowns of all this crazy stuff I find, and anybody willing to talk to me about horror movies. So it's going to be a good time. So we've got like a bunch of videos ready to be uploaded. I just need to have a free hour or two where I can sit down and do it. So editing sucks. No wonder you guys complain about it sometimes. And I will let the rest of you guys take over for now. I will be right back. So
when you said the Wicker Man show, for some reason I thought of like a woodworking version of like Home Improvement or something.
Wicker Man. The Wicker Chair.
Wicker Man.
Brandon and Jake, why don't you guys go ahead and do your intros?
Yeah, and just in case anybody forgets to mention it, like, share, and subscribe to both Inside Movies Galore and The Crypt of Horrors, so that I have some more incentive to actually post stuff.
and our channel, Septum Sen versus the World, which also pairs with Inside Movies Galore at many occasions to review movies and discuss various materials. We also cover various physical media. We have been kind of indisposed due to illness and vacation and professional issues, but we will be back next week operating at hopefully full capacity with our releases, pickups, and a brand spanking new top 15 to celebrate Criterion Month, as Barnes and Noble has their Criterion sale going strong.
And I'm Jake, now frequently guest on Septum Sin versus the World, and not so much this week, as he said, not able to meet due to illness, which is a shame because we do our shout-outs to celebrities who have left us, and there was a huge one this week, and we've been on that, but R.I.P. Stanley, definitely. And of course, I have my own channel, Kotobuki Jake, that I update very rarely, but it's there. It's a nature-themed channel. And over the weekend, I had some interesting, did some travel up to Stanton and got to do some location scouting for horror films. So I'll have to post the pictures soon. It wasn't really scouting, but it was a friend is living in a converted asylum and got to visit some very old, decrepit buildings, and it was interesting. So there'll be some fun videos. I keep saying videos, pictures posted soon. And also got some inspiration to kick my ass into gear for writing. So hopefully there'll be some more of that happening soon. And that's it for me for now.
And I'm Dane Kyle, independent filmmaker out of Charlotte, North Carolina. working on a ton of projects right now, all at the same time, and trying to make two households into one, and trying to just deal with life. But I did, in the midst of all that craziness, I did get my film, The Big Blind, officially now. It's going to be included in the anthology film Drive-In Grindhouse, which is great
Sweet.
because, well, it's great because I wasn't really having a lot of luck getting the Big Blind into festivals, which makes sense because it's kind of a niche genre that's not all that friendly with the traditional genre festivals or regular film festivals. So this seems like a good way to get it out there.
Oh, yeah.
Plus, it's through Tony Newton, and
He's been doing a lot of good stuff lately.
he
So.
has, and Lloyd is in it. Lloyd Kaufman's in it, and a lot of Tony's stuff has been distributed by Troma. So I think that Lloyd being in it will help raise the profile of the anthology as a whole. So, I think that that'll be great, and I feel good that it's going to get an audience that would not have otherwise necessarily been there. So.
It's kind of funny you mentioned Lloyd. I found the original Nuke 'Em High today on Blu-ray, and I was kind of excited about that.
Oh yeah.
So hopefully we can have him on the show like at some point, because turns out a lot of us have like met him and somewhat interact with him to a degree. So
well, and he's a great guy. He loves Jill, loves me, and he especially if we were to talk about the latest film, Return to Nuke 'Em High, aka Volume 2, which has not come out on Blu-ray yet, and I wish it would. But that would be a great time to have him on, because that is the latest and the greatest. Even though he's still been shooting Shakespeare's Shitstorm, that will be the latest and greatest. As we proceed, but he will inevitably want to promote the other one as it gets released on Blu-ray.
You're talking about the return to
yeah.
But anyway, did you go, Dave?
Did I go where?
For the Harding promotion.
Oh no, not yet. David Straggy. I've been sick for the last 10 years, but I have been sick for the last week.
We live in Wisconsin. We live in hellscape winter Wisconsin. So sorry we've been coughing so much. As soon as it got cold, it started happening.
But my name is David Straggy. I run Inside Movies Galore, but also blog at Movies Galore Milwaukee from time to time. But I've been focusing my talents more on the YouTube page that we are actually speaking on at this point in time.
Well, how else would they be hearing us?
Telepathically.
Thanks.
In your mind. But in any case, definitely check out some of my recent reviews. Check out some more cool reviews. Once my voice gets semi better, hopefully it will not be in the low point next week. But next week we have a great week planned.
Thanksgiving, a movie bad enough to get on one of my favorite podcasts, God Awful Movies. That sounds like a painful experience. It's gonna be rough going from high tier art like The Wicker Man to whatever the hell Thanksgiving is. Quick thing for our friend who couldn't be here. So that was Katie Cadaver. She runs the Grindhouse Tees burlesque troupe here in Milwaukee and is an editor for Inside Movies Galore. So she also has a bunch of other projects and has been involved with Troma. So another friend of Lloyd Kaufman.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully you can go see her at Days of the Dead, because I'm sure she's going to do great in that makeup competition because she's really good at it. So her Instagram page is Third Eye Open. I don't quite remember how to spell it. There's a 3 in there somewhere, but we're trying, damn it. She has a Patreon for all her projects. which I think you can find through her Third Eye Open Instagram page. So yeah, go check her out.
More info on her, you can check out some of our previous episodes to find out some of the other cool information about where to exactly find some of her websites.
Yeah, you can just skip right through my insane rantings and go right to the info. But all that aside, so well, hopefully you enjoyed the episode, and we didn't go on too long. So I just love this movie and love talking about it, and it was nice to have an outlet. So like, share, subscribe, and send complaints to the comment section. It'll be fun. We'll have a fun time.
What you thought of the movie?
Or yell at me on Twitter, the Crypt of Horrors.
Just do it anyway.
Say goodnight, everyone.
That works for me.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Night. Night.